There's an app for everything these days, but should we have apps for fly fishing? There are pros and cons to it, but in all honesty, I think fly fishing apps do a lot more harm than good to the sport. You're going to want to keep listening to today's episode to find out why I think that way. This is Untangled, fly fishing for everyone, presented by Ventures Fly Company. Hey folks, welcome to it. This is Untangled. I'm your host, Spencer Durrant. I am stoked to be back. I've actually been gone for the last little bit. You didn't notice because the podcast kept coming out. I did a few podcasts before I went out of town. I was in Alaska, up in Alaska fly fishing. If you get our emails, I sent one when I was up there. I actually did write it while I was in Alaska. I took time out of my Alaskan fishing trip to put something together for y'all. So you should feel pretty special about yourselves. No, I was up in Alaska with my best friend, Lander Crook, and we just had a blast just getting some fishing in before summer ends for me anyways, because I'm back to teaching, back to learning up the good kids on some English. So having some fun with that. But we went and had a wonderful time in Alaska. And don't worry, I've got stories. I'm going to share them with y'all. That's going to be part of story time today. So definitely stay tuned for that. But I'm excited to be back here, back in the shadow of the Rockies, not too far away from Yellowstone. I'm close enough to Yellowstone that I can enjoy it, but I don't have to labor under the fear of getting attacked by a grizzly bear, which is really one of the underrated perks of living where I do, is I've got fantastic elk hunting not too far from my house, but I don't have to worry about the grizzly bears where I'm at. So it's really nice because I am a little terrified. I will admit that they do put a little bit of fear into me. So I'm glad I don't have to worry about them. It's funny though, because I've actually never seen a grizzly bear in the wild. I've seen tons of black bears. And even with all the time I spend in Alaska, I've seen lynx. I have photographs of Canadian lynx, which are incredibly rare creatures to get photographs of, especially in Alaska. I've got pictures of those. I almost hit one with a rental car on my honeymoon. That's how close I got to those lynx. But I've still yet to see a grizzly bear up there in Alaska. So it's just one of those things. Maybe once I finally see one, I won't be scared of the grizzly, but who knows? Anyways, enough talk about bears. This is a fly fishing show, so let's get right down to it, folks. We got a pretty good group of topics this week, I think. We're talking fly fishing literature this week, and as an author, as a fly fishing author or myself, I have a few opinions about fly fishing literature, so definitely going to want to stick around for that one. We're also going to talk about some tips for rigging up fly rods, casting tips, so we can really improve some casting hopefully today. And like we teased in the hook to the show, we are going to be talking about fly fishing apps. So I've got a lot to say on this subject, and please just hear me out before you start bringing your torches and pitchforks to me on social media. All right. And the last thing we're going to talk about this week is matching your fly to the right size of tippet. So pretty good group of topics and whatnot. Before we jump into story time, though, I do want to just take a second and thank everybody who has left a rating, a review, or subscribed to the show, or done all three of those things. I was reading through some of the new reviews, I think on Apple the other day, and you guys just had a bunch of great stuff to say about it. I really appreciate that. The whole crew here at VFC appreciates it. It's nice to get the validation that what I think is helpful, what I think is going to work, is you guys are actually finding helpful as well. So I really appreciate that. And if you're listening and you haven't subscribed to the show, please do so. That helps us out more than I can tell you. Anyways, enough of the housekeeping stuff. Let's get to what I'm sure y'all are pretty interested in. Story time with Spencer. We're going to be talking shop about Alaska this week. So grab your Diet Coke, get comfortable, and get ready to hear some great stories. All right, I reached for my Diet Coke as we started story time, but there's just one problem. I don't have any this week. I don't have any soda in the house because I was gone and my wife was really busy with work. So the grocery shopping really hasn't been done and we're all out of Diet Coke. It's a tragedy. Send thoughts and prayers if you could, please, because this is a really tough time. This is a tough thing for me to be going through all by my lonesome up here. I could just go down the street to the gas station and grab some, but that would require me getting up. And it's one of those lazy days. I woke up this morning and just immediately thought I'm going back to bed. So, anyways, let's jump right into story time, folks. I think you guys are going to enjoy this today. I was up in Alaska, like I said, and my buddy Lander, we were we were bouncing through a few different options for what we wanted to do on this particular trip, because it was my last adventure before school starts up again. So, and for those of you who don't know, I teach high school. So I wanted to go out and, get the last hurrah out so that I can come back and focus on the teaching and do that. And Lander wanted to do something too. So we're just trying to figure out where do we go? And we've been down to Kenai and we fished the salmon in Kenai before. It's a lot of fun. We caught some really fun fish while we were down there. Did that a couple of years ago, but it's a lot of people. And one of the reasons I live in Wyoming is that there's not very many people here. I don't know if you've noticed that about Wyoming, but it's kind of sparsely populated and I enjoy that part of it. And anyways, we decided to do something that was a little bit off the beaten path. So we actually drove from Fairbanks. We got in the truck and we drove north to the Arctic Circle, which if you've ever driven that road, that is road is it's a very loose term here. It's a path through the forest. It's a path through the tundra. That's about it. And we drove that, but we drove all the way up to the north or to the Arctic Circle, which was really cool. I've never been that far north before, so that was a lot of fun. We got up there and we fished. There's a whole bunch of little streams that cross that highway as you're driving to the Arctic Circle, and almost all of them had grayling in them, and that's what we did. We just got off and we just fished grayling. A couple of them had some nice ones. We both caught a 15-inch grayling at a one stream that was, it was either right before or right after the Arctic Circle. So it was really far north, and there were some big grayling in those little streams. And for those of you who don't know, grayling, a big grayling is a 15-incher. They just don't get terribly big, and the places where they do get big, there's sort of a cult-like following of grayling. They're really cool fish, but they're nowhere near as picky as trout just because of the nature of where they live. They have very short growing seasons, so they can't really get discriminatory with their food sources. They've just got to eat and eat and eat, pack the pounds on again for another long winter. So they're very eager to eat your dry flies. And cutthroat get that rap all the time, right? That cutthroat are easy. Cutthroat, they're a dumb fish. Well, no, cutthroat are just opportunistic, but grayling, they take that to a whole new level. They take that idea of opportunism. It's like me with all the wings I could ever want. Yeah, I'm going to eat those. I don't care that there's a cheesecake food truck right next to me either, because I love cheesecake. You don't get a body like this, all right, without loving some cheesecake. And if you're not watching the video podcast, you're missing out on this wonderful physique that I've got to show off here for you. Oh, shoot. But anyways, so we did that one day. We cruised up, but the highlight of this trip was there's this one river up there in the interior of Alaska that has a reputation for growing truly trophy-sized grayling. And if I recall correctly, the state of Alaska, they define a trophy grayling as anything above, I think it's like 3 pounds or 18 inches, one or the other. I can't remember which. And if I'm misquoting that, if there's folks who know, please correct me. But that's what I'm remembering off the top of my head here. Anyways, we went to this stream because, like I said, it's got that reputation for growing really big grayling. And Lander and I have fished this before, and we caught a bunch of really nice fish a couple of years ago off there. We caught a few grayling that went 21 inches, which, like I mentioned, that's just a stellar fish. But they've also never been very picky there. It's just a matter of finding where the big fish are and then just covering that water very thoroughly. But this time, it was really interesting because we got to the river, and it was foggy, it was cold, and it was very unlike the rest of the weather. We had beautiful weather for the whole trip except for this one day. And the hatch started coming off. This is a river that's got a very prolific amount of bug life on it. And the hatch started off in the morning with pale morning duns, or PMDs. So those started coming off, and the grayling came up and just started going nuts for the PMDs. But it was interesting because I've never fished for grayling before where they get very discerning about the stage of the hatch. These grayling were turning up the duns that I was fishing. They would not rise for the duns. I ended up tying on PMD emergers to catch some of these fish because they were being picky. And I've never seen that with grayling before. It was actually a ton of fun because it felt just like trout fishing, but 3,000 miles from home in the Alaskan tundra, which is just an experience that I think everybody should have. It's a wonderful place. If you've never been there, it's worth going to Alaska. Well, that PMD hatch ended up tapering off, and then it kind of switched over to drakes. There was an enormous mayfly. I'm not super familiar with drakes. There's never been a lot of drake hatches where I've lived, so I've never gotten very intimate with the drakes, but these looked like brown drakes to me. And they started coming off, and the fish would not take your fly unless it was a brown drake, unless it was a good brown drake imitation. And I got lucky. I actually had some big drakes in my box, so me and Lander were able to fish through that. And then once the drakes were done, it switched again to a blue wing hatch, and the fish keyed in on the blue wings. And it was the same thing. They really started to just want to eat the emergers less so than the duns, at least at the beginning of the hatch. It was just a wonderful, and it was that way for a couple of days. We fished this river, I think 2 or 3 days in a row. And it was like that every day where the hatch just came on. And if you weren't fishing the right fly, those fish weren't going to eat your fly. That's just not really, to my knowledge, it's not a very common happening with grayling fishing, just by virtue of where they live. So it was a really wonderful little adventure to have that. And if any of you have experienced grayling fishing like that before, I'd love to hear about it. But it really does drive home the point that if you want to be a successful angler, right? Yes, you can think, oh, I'm going to go to Alaska and I'm going to catch a bunch of fish because it's Alaska. Well, yes and no. You still have to know a little bit of what you're doing. But if I wasn't prepared for some kind of hatch, like thankfully I had a bunch of flies with me, we would have got our butts kicked on that grayling river. So it pays to know. It pays to be a well-rounded angler, even when you're going to a place where, yes, the fishing's easier. It still pays to have those skills in your back pocket. But anyways, hopefully y'all enjoyed that little story. Let's go ahead and get into what I think most of y'all are here for anyways, which is the questions. I got a couple of really great short questions to start the show off with, and then we'll jump into the more in-depth questions right after these. And just as a reminder, if you have a question about fly fishing that you'd like answered on the show, please don't hesitate. There is the link to submit your questions in the podcast description. Go ahead and click on it. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to be able to help you out, answer some questions, and have some fun on the show. All right, let's get into it here. First question. Dear Spencer, I've been looking to acquire some good fly fishing literature. However, the selection is a bit overwhelming. In your opinion, what are some of your top recommendations? P.S. Diet Coke for the win. However, if you ever have a chance to try the regular Coke in the 12-ounce bottles imported from Mexico, it's made with cane sugar and is really hard to beat. That comes to us from Peyton from West Virginia. Peyton, you're 100% right about the Mexican Coke. That is wonderful stuff. I've had it before, thankfully. It is fantastic. Makes you wonder why they went away from real cane sugar here in America. It doesn't really make any sense, does it? Anyways, your question, so when someone says literature, I think I shy away from the how-tos. So I'm not going to have Tom Rosenbauer on this list. I'm not going to have Devin Olson on this list because I'm thinking the literature side of things. I'm thinking the stories, the diving into the why, the very in-depth sort of stuffy just type of writing that maybe not everybody likes, but I really enjoy it. I mean, of course I do. I'm an English teacher, so I'm going to nerd out about this stuff. First thing on your list, anything from John Gierak. I've actually had the chance to fish with him before. His writing is incredible, and he really knows what he's doing out on the water. He's a very authentic writer, and it comes through in his writing. It's hard to beat. I mean, he's been doing it for almost 40 years now. So it's hard to beat that level of success that John's built up. I'll also highly recommend Steve Ramirez and his series of books. His first one, I believe, was Casting. Oh, shoot. Now I'm going to forget. I think it's Casting Forward. It's either Casting Forward or Casting Onward. And Steve, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of your first book, but they're wonderful books. They actually, I think it was Casting Onward, plays a major role in the new fly fishing film, Mending the Line, which if you didn't have a chance to see that, I highly recommend it. Anyways, Steve Ramirez. Another good one is, and this one sort of falls into both instructional and literature, but I want to include it because it was a watershed book for me. It was a big moment for me when I read it. And that would be In the Ring of the Rise by Vincent Marinaro. And then Steve Raymond. He's a great writer. I love reading Steve's stuff. His newest book is Six Fish Limit. Read through that, and it's wonderful. Just a bunch of fun fly fishing related stories. It's hard to beat stuff like that. And then anything from Tom McGuane as well. The Longest Silence is often held up as some of the best fly fishing literature that was ever written. But that's a good list. That's where I'd start if I were you, Peyton. Thank you for sending that question on in. All right, and then our last short question before we dive into the meat of the show comes to us. Adam from Washington writes in and says, I am brand new to fly fishing. I grew up lakeshore fishing in the Uintas with power bait and a bubble. I'm trying to teach myself how to fly fish, but don't really know where to start. I'm just wondering if you have some tips for a brand new beginner for rigging up the pole, fly choice, how to pick a good spot on the river, and basic casting. Thank you. Adam, congrats on getting started. I love the Uintas as well. I think he's referring to the Uinta Mountains there in Utah. It sounds like that's where he grew up. I've got a ton of tips. All right, you're in luck. You came to the right spot. We actually have a video about rigging up your rods. I'm going to link that in the podcast description. It's part of our fly fishing masterclass that you need to watch. Seriously, the beginner fly fishing masterclass is the best place to get started. If you're really just coming over to this for the first time, that's what you need to go check out. So the link to that is in the podcast description. All right. And with that said, let's dive into the heart of this week's show. All righty, folks. First question for the main part of this week's show comes to us. Micah from Idaho writes in and says, I've been fly fishing since before I was even able to walk. My dad would stick me in a baby sling in his waders and take me with him in the river. I now get to take my son fishing with me and teach him the same way my dad taught me. I'm also trying to teach my wife how to fly fish. What tips do you have for teaching other people how to fly fish? What is the best way to teach casting techniques? My dad just kind of stuck me out in the river with a pole and let me at it. Is this the most effective way to teach? Well, Micah, first off, congrats, because it sounds like your family is going to stick together forever, because we all know families who fish together stay together. So congrats. No, teaching fly fishing in general is, I don't want to say frustrating. That's the wrong word. It is involved. I think that's a word I'm going to go with. It is an involved process because you don't realize how much of what you need to teach becomes second nature. It's just habit when you're out on the water, and trying to teach all those little things to folks can get really overwhelming, especially with casting, because casting it's a very nebulous idea. And almost every guide or instructor who I have ever met has a different way of teaching casting to folks. So on that subject, though, we actually just released a video on how to fly cast. It's part of the beginner fly fishing masterclass. I'll link that in the podcast description. So that would be one way I would recommend teaching folks how to cast, is have them watch that video and then try to apply those out on the water. But as far as teaching people to fish in general, I think it's important to take folks someplace where they will get rewarded if they do enough things right. When I used to guide back in Utah, back when I still lived in Utah, I was doing a lot of guiding. I had a favorite spot that I would take my clients if they had never fished before, because as long as they got a decent drift, the fish were going to eat their flies. And I can't really think of a better way to get people to love this than by getting them into fish, because that's not what it's all about, right? But that's a quick way to get them addicted to it the same way we are. And eventually, it becomes less about the fish and more about the experience itself. But if you can get these people who are new to this and you can get them into fish right off the bat, you're just it's going to go so much more smoothly for you. It keeps folks interested. All of a sudden, it doesn't seem like this impossible task the way it can feel if you take folks to like a tailwater for the first time, because it's so technical and it's just so much. So that's why I recommend taking folks who are new to it to places where they're going to catch fish so long as they do a few things right. All the places I take my wife to fish right now are the exact same as that, because it's places where the fish are less discerning. If you put a decent drift in front of them, it's where they're going to eat. And my wife's still early enough too in her fly fishing career that I just want her to go out and have success and build that confidence. In addition to that, I also like to focus on places where there's plenty of room to cast. That makes it easier to teach both casting and fishing, because they can focus on just the fishing part of it. And I've found that everything else clicks a lot better when they're catching fish. It's a lot easier to point out that, hey, you didn't catch a fish on that drift because you had a lot of drag, when they're catching fish versus if they're not catching fish. I hope that makes sense. Now, some specific tips for teaching people to cast. The way that I go about it is I like to demonstrate, here's what a good cast looks like, and then I have them try to imitate that. I've found that to be pretty productive for me over the years. I like to use the clock face analogy to help them understand where the rod tip needs to be on the front and back cast. And with some people, I'll even say out loud, cast back, forward, to try and help them get the timing of the cast down. So it's kind of a mixture of a bunch of techniques. And you'll see that in the video that I've got linked in the podcast description there, that there's a lot of different ways to try and do that. But these are the broad strokes that I would say I depend on when I'm trying to teach folks how to cast. So hopefully that answers your question, Micah. If you need some more clarification on it, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. All right. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you very much for sending that question in. So this next question is the one that we've all probably been waiting for. It's the one about fly fishing apps. So I want to say before I get it. Well, look, I'll read the question first, then I'll get into that. So the question comes to us. Blake from Utah writes in, says, I've just started trying to fly fish this year, and I wanted to know if you have an app you prefer to use to find water to fish. Pros and cons to those apps. Thanks for the insight, and I love the podcast. Blake, this is a really good question. Even if I don't know if you're completely ready for the answer. You're newer to fly fishing, so some of the things that I'm going to say might be they come with the benefit of having done this for over more than 2/3 of my life. So I've been fly fishing for that long. Now, before I get into this anymore, I've got some notes here because I thought this out and I wanted to make sure that I say things the way that I want them to be said. But I'm not coming. All right. Sorry. I keep starting back and forth here, but I'm trying to be authentic with you guys and give you my true thoughts. I don't want information to be gatekept until you've proven your worth, or I'm not trying to keep out the riffraff or anything like that. So my reluctance to use fly fishing apps, and I wouldn't even call it reluctance, I don't like them. I don't think they're very good for the sport. It does not come from a place of me saying, oh, well, you're not good enough, and that app makes you'll just, no, you've got to do it my way. You need to pay my fees and pay your dues. I'm not coming at it from that high and mighty standpoint. I really want to make that clear before I answer the rest of this question. What I think, I would rather see people put in some work to find places to fish, because I think that creates a sense of ownership and stewardship. When you put the effort in to find a place, then all of a sudden you're a lot more involved in protecting that place and keeping that place as pristine as it was when you found it. And I think that helps us create a better spirit of conservation around these limited resources that we have, because like it or not, the resources that we have here, the fly fishing resources that we have, are limited, and they're not making new trout habitat these days. I mean, they kind of are, but for the purposes of this argument, they're really not. So I think that you value something a lot more if you work hard for it versus just getting it handed to you. I value my drafty old house here in Wyoming because my wife and I worked our butts off. We didn't see each other for a year just so we could afford the down payment to move up here. It's the same concept with fly fishing and with these apps. I really don't like fishing apps. I don't even like Facebook groups where people post hero shots of fish. You know, the shots where they're holding them straight out to the camera and grinning and the fish looks like it's scared to death. Or when folks are constantly asking, where should I go fish? Because to me, a really big draw in fly fishing is the adventure part of it. Seeking out new places, exploring. You lose so much of that when all this information is just handed to you in an app. And on top of that, aside from public and private land demarcations to show you where access points are, most of these apps are just compiling a lot of information that already exists on state game and fish websites. And they're putting that into a single app, and then often they're trying to charge you for it. They're not really providing you anything that you can't go find on your own, and it's not terribly valuable. or so unique that you can't find it anywhere else. That just doesn't sit well with me. There's also the problem of hot spotting places. Now, hot spotting, and oh my goodness, we could do an entire podcast on the problem of hot spotting, and maybe I should. Maybe that should be the next podcast that me and Alex do together. But hot spotting, for those who don't know what that term is, it's where you go out and you fish someplace and then you post about it and you tell everybody exactly where you went and what you fished with. Now, that can be a problem because not every little stream and pond needs to be highlighted on an app with directions and information on how to fish it, because not every place can handle that kind of pressure. If it's something like the Madison or the Yellowstone or the Provo or the Green, those big rivers that are used to the pressure, that's not hot spotting. It's the smaller stuff, the stuff that's kind of off the beaten path, maybe the stuff that you work really hard to find yourself. And if you want to go ahead and share it with everybody, by all means do that. But there's also that part that we need to remember. These places don't belong just to us. They belong to all of us. So hot spotting maybe isn't the best thing to do, because you don't want to ruin it, not only for yourself in the future, but for everybody else that's fishing it as well. And honestly, and that's a problem with apps, because the apps do tend to hotspot places. And at that point, once you're being given all this stuff, you're given all this information, you're really not learning anything. If someone's telling you, go here at this time of day and use this fly and stand in this exact spot, what are you learning? You're really not learning very much. You're getting it all spoon-fed to you. And I think that leads to you really not valuing the fishery as much as you would if you put the time and effort in to find it on your own. And I think this is part of why our fisheries are declining in quality across the West. They are being loved to death because it is so much easier to access places these days. And the barrier to them used to be, how hard are you willing to work to find the hidden gems? And now there is no barrier because it's all on an app somewhere. So yes, more people are fishing, and that's a good thing. More people fishing is a good thing. Where they're fishing, we've seen a lot of issues with too much pressure on different rivers to where it's just turning into a zoo, or the fish population starts to suffer. And we've seen issues like that crop up a lot across the West in the last couple of years. We're loving these places to death. And I think part of that is from the proliferation of fly fishing apps, because there is no more, well, I shouldn't say that. There's a lot less of the, how hard are you willing to work to find a wonderful place to fish? That attitude just doesn't seem to be as prevalent anymore. And that's, again, that goes back to my original argument that if you don't have that ownership of it, you're not going to value that fishery as much as you could. Now, I bet some of you are sitting here and thinking, geez, you sound like a real grumpy old guy. Technology isn't evil. Okay, you're right. You're 100% right. I have a Garmin InReach Plus that I use when I'm in the backcountry for hunting and fishing, and I love it. But here's the thing. When I moved to Wyoming, I moved to an area of the state that I have never fished before. I've fished a lot in Wyoming growing up, but I've never, before I moved to where I live now in Wyoming, I'd never been to this part of Wyoming before. And it's completely new to me. All the fisheries. I have spent hours on Google Maps looking up stocking reports, doing research, reading blog posts, trying to piece together different locations. And then I've put the miles on my truck and I've just gone out and explored. This June, actually, almost every night for the month of June, Monday through Friday, I was cruising up because it was finally warm enough and the snow was melting enough I could get into these places. I was cruising up in my truck almost every night to a different lake or stream, just exploring. because I'd never been to these places before. I was trying to figure out what the fishing was like for myself. I bounced on a ton of awful roads. I found one road that, oh my goodness, it was. I'm pretty sure I ruined my whole front end on that one road right there. But I found these great little places to fish. One week, I remember it rained every day that week, and I went up fishing. And I think that whole week I caught, like 2 brook trout, 2 tiny little brookies that whole week, because I was going out, I was exploring, and I was getting my butt kicked because I didn't know. I didn't know what these fisheries were like. It was the first time that I'd been to them. But that experience of going out and exploring, it was so much stinking fun. I remember that, and I look back on that really fondly. All the foxes and the elk that I saw during the month of June while I was out there driving, that's stuff that you don't, that's an adventure that you don't get to replicate if you're just following directions. You know, it's really, you lose that vital part of it. The adventure and the exploration is really worth it. And like I said, you know, I spent that whole month of June. What did I have to show for it? Well, I had a really sore back, a broken truck, and a couple of tiny brook trout. You know, I went out and I got my butt kicked for a good chunk of the month of June, but I wouldn't have traded that for anything because I got to see some amazing country. And now I know I've got a better handle of what the fishing's like. It's what we're getting close to the end of August. July and August have been 2 of the best fishing months I've ever had in my life because I put so much work in on the ground, and now I kind of figured some things out, and I've been able to go out and just get into fish and get into some good fish and just have fun with it, which again, I think you lose that experience when it's handed to you via an app. So short of it, I don't use apps. And I think the fly fishing community would be better off if we didn't have them, if we didn't depend on having things just given to us. Again, I really want to reiterate that I'm not trying to gatekeep information. I'm not saying that, oh, well, we'll tell you about this place once you've proven your worth. I'm not saying that. I am saying that there is value in learning to do these things on your own. Because again, if you're told where to go and what to use, what are you learning? How are you becoming a better angler? I mean, you might just through virtue of doing it more and more, but the little nuances, the little things you're supposed to learn about, why does this fly work right now? You're missing out on the why part of it. And that's the part that keeps folks from being really exceptional anglers. That's what separates the best anglers I know, the folks who can just catch fish after fish. Those people all thoroughly understand the why. They know why these things work the way they do. And that is a game changer for them when they go out to fish. And the folks who aren't at that level, they don't fully understand the why. And as for myself, I'm not in that group that fully understands the why. I 100%, I've been able to understand quite a bit of it because I've been doing it for a long time, but I don't fully understand the why. And I still get my butt kicked very often. It's something that still happens, but I'm learning every time I go out. And when it's handed to you on an app, I just don't feel like the opportunity for learning is there. And I'll go back to my point about the stewardship of it. It's hard to feel a sense of ownership and stewardship of something if it's just handed to you. So, and with how crowded our fisheries are now, we need good stewardship of our resources now more than we ever have before. So I do believe that the proliferation of fly fishing apps has led to appreciating our fly fishing resources a lot less. So, yeah, that was a lot. I really didn't want it to turn into a rant, but hopefully hopefully you understand where I'm coming from. And if I'm off base, let me know. All right, these are my thoughts. This is how I feel about it. But I reckon there's a lot of folks out there who probably feel the same way too. So if you have an opinion on this, please let me know. I'd love to hear about it. I think this is a discussion worth having. I'm not trying to fight with folks. I'm not trying to belittle people who use the apps. I'm just trying to get us as a fly fishing industry and as a fly fishing community to think before we start doing things, before we start chasing more dollars or whatever it is. What's best for the resources? What's best for the community? And I think at the end of the day, a community that understands the why behind what we're doing, that really gets it, I think that is so much better for all of us at the end of the day than a community that just wants to go out and put 20 fish in the net and get their hero shot for Facebook and Instagram. So that's how I feel about it. And we'll move on now. So thanks for sticking with me through that rant. All right, folks, last question comes to us today. Sarah from Georgia writes in and says, "Hey, y'all, I really enjoy the show and have learned quite a bit from listening. I started fly fishing July 7th, 2023. I'd never even picked up a fly rod. Now all I want to do is practice, fish, and absorb as much information as I can. My question is, how do you know the weight of your fly and how do you match the fly to the tippet? Thanks." Sarah, thanks a bunch for your question. I'm really glad that you're getting out on the water and that you've been bitten by the bug, just like all the rest of us. It is a ton of fun. And I say this often, but your bank account's never going to be the same. So just get used to that. Interesting question from you. So you don't really need to know the weight of your fly. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that, but we never really concern ourselves with fly weight, but we do concern ourselves with line weight. I think that might be what you're thinking of. Line weight should come printed on the box that your fly line comes in. If that's not what you were thinking of, please let me know, and I will do my best to try and explain and answer your question. But for the second half of your question, matching flies to tippet, there's a general rule that you can use, and that is take the fly size and divide it by 3, and that gives you the size of tippet that you should use. For example, a size 12 dry fly, you divide 12 by 3, that gives you 4. So that means you should be using 4X tippet to fish with that. A size 18 would be fished on 6X tippet. So that's kind of a rough guideline, and it works if you're really unsure of what to do, but I don't really subscribe to that too much. In all honesty, I use 4X for the majority of my trout fishing, unless I'm fishing a single dry fly that's really small, or if I'm fishing a lot of really small nymphs. A 5X, it just tangles a lot easier than 4X, and it breaks easier. And often where I'm fishing, I don't really need to worry about super fine tippets. The fish aren't terribly leader shy. So I like to use 4X for flies, from about 10 to 18. And then 5X if I'm fishing anything smaller than that. I'll downsize to 6 or 7X if I'm on a technical river where they're coming after my tiny bugs. But the time that I spend on water like that's decreased a lot lately. And I kind of miss it, actually. I want to get back to it. It's a lot of folks find it very maddening when the fish will take your fly if it is a size 28, but they turn their nose up at it when it's 26. And it can be maddening. It's a special kind of frustrating, but it's just fun. So I like it. I'm not really sure why I love it so much, but I do. So hopefully that answers your question, Sarah. If you need more clarification or if you have anything else you'd like to add, please don't hesitate. Let me know. And that goes for anybody who sends a question in. If I don't answer it completely perfectly, let me know. I'm more than happy to give you more information as much as I can to help you understand where we're at with it. So that wraps up the show this week, folks. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to what I've got to say. And if you could be so kind as to please rate the show wherever you're listening to it. And if you're not subscribed, please subscribe to it as well. Subscribe to the video podcast on YouTube. Don't forget to check out our beginner fly fishing masterclass. We're releasing new episodes of that, not quite weekly, but pretty quickly here. We're releasing a lot of episodes, and we're really excited to share this with everybody. So make sure you're checking that out as well. And as always, if you have any questions about fly fishing that you'd like answered, please do not hesitate to send those questions on in to us. There's always a link in the podcast description for you to send those questions on in. And until next week, get out on the water, have some fun, and tie lines, everybody.